Meantime, let's get back to this country and the Washington. The chief national security correspondent, Jennifer Griffin, is live for us at the Pentagon. Jennifer.
Well, Trace, I think what's so extraordinary about tonight's strikes, not only all eyes were on Fordo, and for the past week we've been talking about the B-2 bombers and the massive ordnance penetrators. Those are the 30,000-pound GBU-57 bunker buster bombs. What we can report tonight, after Sean Hannity spoke to the president, we learned that there were 6 massive ordnance penetrators dropped on Fordo. And as the president wrote on Truth Social, that Fordo site is gone. My sources tell me that those bunker buster bombs would have been dropped through the air ventilation shafts at Fordo. So most likely 3 bunker busters through each of those shafts. We had been focusing on the entrances. There are 2 entrances to the Fordo site, which is 300 feet underground. We've also reported that the MOP bomb can penetrate about 200 feet underground, but they work in pairs. The B-2 bomber, which flew out of Whiteman Air Force Base, they fly nonstop and are refueled along the way to this site at Fordo. They drop one MOP bomb, a 30,000-pound bomb that goes about 200 feet down. There's soil that is then removed, exposed, and then the second bomb, which drops into a hole that has a radius of about 25 feet. It goes into the same hole and can go even deeper. So Fordo, we understand, is gone. That is significant because that was the main nuclear enrichment site, and it was deeply fortified in that mountain. But then there are the 2 other sites. You have Natanz, which had 3 underground enrichment facilities. Those 3, we understand that 30 Tomahawk missiles were fired from U.S. submarines about 400 miles away from these sites, the sites at Isfahan and Natanz. Those U.S. submarines were most likely Ohio-class converted guided missile subs. Most likely the USS Georgia or Florida were involved in those strikes. What I'm being told, though, is at Isfahan is an even harder target than Fordo. We hadn't talked about it as much this week because all the focus was on the B-2s and the MOP bombs and Fordo. But Isfahan is where the uranium hexafluoride is, where the centrifuges are made. And my understanding is there is a tunnel into the mountain there, and it is much, much deeper than at Fordo. And so we will have to wait and see the bomb damage assessment at that site to see how whether it was completely destroyed. I'm told from very, very knowledgeable sources that that was most likely the hardest site. So we'll have to see.
I know we're still getting new information coming in here, Jennifer, but just for kind of clarification here, we have been told, or we've been kind of reporting that the B-2s went in and they went into Fordo and may have dropped as many as 6 of the bunker busters, and there were as many as 30 Tomahawks fired at Natanz and Isfahan. And I'm wondering, do we know, have we ruled out the possibility of any bunker busters being used on Isfahan and on Natanz?
I'm told that the bunker busters were used at Fordo and that it was the Tomahawks that targeted Natanz and Isfahan. So at this point in time, you would have had at least 3 B-2 bombers there above Fordo. Again, when we woke up this morning, all eyes were on the reports and the sightings, the radar trackers, the flight trackers who saw that there were those 6 B-2 bombers flying towards Guam. And now if you were to fly from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri all the way to Iran, let's say, that's a 30-hour straight flight. So those bombers could not possibly have been involved in this strike. That's when we look at what would have been flying east. Clearly, some B-2 bombers from Whiteman flew east, and that's why we saw this week about 30 air refuelers that were positioned in Europe and along the way and throughout the Middle East, because they would have been required to create an air refueling bridge to get those B-2s. It's a 15-hour flight if you go east from Whiteman to Fordo. And so those bombers would have flown east, and they would have been refueled along the way, and they would be on their way back home to Whiteman as we speak, Trace.
Jennifer Griffin, we'll get back to you. Jennifer.
We bring in the host of Special Report. Brett Baer is with us. Brett, thank you for being with us. I did have a conversation when you were breaking news live right here on Fox I got some details as, again, you got on the air immediately, and the fact we had initially discussed at length and in great detail the issue of maybe 2 bunker buster bombs being needed for this Fordo facility. It ends up 6. It ends up that the Israelis had only gotten 75% of the other 2 nuclear sites that they had been attacking on a regular basis. And Tomahawk missiles, the president reporting tonight, they were totally, all 3 of them, obliterated. Incredible news. There's history tonight here.
Yeah, Sean, it's a historic night. It is. We'll see what the battle damage assessment is on the ground from Iran. But the Israelis are ecstatic. You saw that in the prime minister's statement saying that this is a pivot point, he believes, for the Middle East. The fact that there were 6 bunker buster bombs from those B-2s, 30 Tomahawk missiles from the U.S. submarines hitting the Isfahan site, the Natanz site, and Fordo. You know, we talk a lot about Fordo being the most protected, and that's where a lot of those bunker busters were focused. But the Isfahan site, believe it or not, is also really deep, I'm told from experts who have been looking at it for years, and that's where they stored the highly enriched uranium. I think there's going to be a real question about what goes forward, what happens next. I've been in contact with some of our allies, leaders in the region and other countries in the region, and one said this to me: Iran will have to respond. They have to save face. Their capabilities have been degraded, but they're not impotent. That's important to realize, that while the president is saying that this is a tremendous success and he believes they have been completely obliterated, the history will show that the Iran leadership will not go down without swinging. What that swing
Brett,
looks like,
I can add some
we've seen the
color
missiles.
to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, no one could argue, I think, by any objective measure that this phase of this operation was a complete success. But there is a part 2, and they did game out all of this. And as you and I both know, there have been many, many meetings where these plans have been discussed in great detail. And part 2 of this, though, is to protect American assets on the ground in the region. And that means people, and that means specific locations. They are prepared for any retaliation. And the president was very clear, unambiguous, in his statement again tonight to the Iranians what the consequences will be if they, in fact, try to retaliate.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important, because in the region, as you and I know, strength matters, and that's what talks over there. Peace through strength, but strength first. And I think that that's the signal the president was sending. If any U.S. citizen, any U.S. base, any U.S. facility comes under Iranian attack, all bets are off as far as this being a limited type of strike. And you're right, they have a lot of plans going forward if that's the case. One of the questions is, what does the opposition on the ground look like? How does this all develop? That's not something that I've heard that the U.S. is really focused on. You know, regime change, while it may be tangential, is for the Iranians to decide, much like the president delivered that speech, Sean, in Saudi Arabia, which he said, we don't want you to be our image. We want you to be your own countries, but we want to do deals with you, and we want to change the face of the Middle East and how it operates.
You know, but I think you are very wise in cautioning people, and I did this all week, and remind people that there's no such thing as a military operation that does not have great risk associated with it. You know, at the end of the president's statement tonight, it was striking when he did thank God for the safety and the safe return of our troops, and just being appreciative that it was successful. There's always risk associated with it. There's always risk of retaliation. But there is no doubt tonight the Iranians no longer are a nuclear power. There is no doubt we can say tonight that the world, I think you can say unequivocally, is a safer place. It doesn't mean they still don't have their ballistic missiles. It doesn't mean that they will retreat. It doesn't mean that they will unconditionally surrender. It doesn't mean that the American military's job is done. They will protect American assets, interests, and people that are in the region. That has been made very clear, and the president made clear the consequences. So they do so at their own peril. They didn't listen to President Trump the first time. Let's see if they learn something before they strike back or attempt to.
Yeah, I just am really struck by the operational security, Sean, of all of this. The fact that Iran really, the intelligence said, wanted to strike Israel first, and then the president came forward and said, let's negotiate, thinking there could be a possibility for a path for negotiation. But he said 60 days. On day 61, Israel attacks first, changes the dynamic, really hits them hard, takes out the surface-to-air missiles, opens the door to the possibility. All the while, the president's saying, you could get back to the negotiation table. Then he says, within 2 weeks, I'll make the decision. Well, 2 days is within 2 weeks. He wasn't lying, but it was about operational security. And when the 6 B-2 bombers go west, everybody's looking, they're covering it over there. It's look at the shiny thing. It was already in motion in the east.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
I'm struck by the operational
you've got to also
security.
say, the day after the president mentioned within 2 weeks, the next day the Iranian foreign minister came out and said, nope, no interest in negotiating. That could have accelerated the timeline, but that would only be speculation on my part.
That's right. Yeah, and they have the opportunity. They had it multiple times. The foreign minister shut it down in Europe. So we'll see what comes next.
All right, Brett Baer, as always, we appreciate you being with us, and special report every weeknight.
If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date with future videos. Thank you for watching.